Welcome to Bedside History. Tonight we will softly explore the world of the Vikings. Settle in and relax. If you enjoy this story, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. The Vikings were fierce warriors and skilled sailors. They explored new seas and built strong settlements. Their story is one of adventure and bravery. It is also one of harsh struggle and brutal reality. Tonight we will look at both the good and the bad, the courage and the cruelty, the faith and the fights. Could you have survived their world? Let us travel back in time and see the Vikings as they really were. Fierce, complex, unforgettable. Imagine a world where firelight flickers softly on wooden walls. Voices rise in song, and the air hums with laughter and stories. This is the heart of Viking life. Picture yourself there. The scent of sweet honeymead, rich ale, and smoky hearth fills the air around you. Neighbors, kin, and travelers share tales of the sea and the hunt. Their voices rise and fall, weaving together joy and sorrow, hope and hardship. Drinking was more than just a pastime here. It was a ritual, a way to connect with others, to celebrate victories, both great and small, to honor the gods, and to ease the ache of long winters and harsh days. Mead brewed from honey was the favored drink, golden and smooth on the tongue. Ale, made from barley, warmed the belly after a cold day. Sometimes, rare herbs and spices added a sharpness that tingled the tongue and delighted the senses. Beyond the drinks themselves, the Vikings also explored other natural substances. The blue-flowered henbane might be brewed into potions believed to inspire dreams or courage. Mugwort, pungent and fragrant, was burned or steeped to clear the mind or ease pain. These natural medicines and mild hallucinogens formed part of the Vikings' spiritual and daily life. They were used carefully and with deep respect. In this world, balance was everything between joy and recklessness, revelry and respect. The Vikings loved to boast. Tales often grew taller with every cup raised. But even in their merriment, rules held firm. Guests who drank too much and caused harm were shamed or sent away. Honor mattered more than pleasure. A person's worth was measured by their courage, loyalty, and kindness. Even during the wildest celebrations, cruelty was never admired. Bravery was prized. Justice was swift. Generosity marked those who deserved respect. Imagine hearing the roar of laughter, the clash of drinking horns, and the murmur of whispered secrets all around you. Yet beneath the noise lay a strong community, bound by shared values. Stories passed from mouth to ear, lessons on honor, warnings of betrayal and celebrations of love. As you breathe in this world, wrapped in quiet and calm, ask yourself, could you have kept your balance here? Could you have joined in the dance of fire and song without losing yourself? Could you have found meaning in the mead hall's warm glow? These questions linger as the night deepens. The Viking world was one of contrasts, fierce and gentle, wild and warm. Tonight, you were invited to step inside, to listen and to dream. As the bonds of family and clan wove tightly through Viking life, so too did the strands of power begin to twist and turn. From humble beginnings grew leaders who sought to unite the scattered tribes under a single banner, kings and queens. Who would shape the future of the Viking world in this chapter? You will journey into the halls of power, where decisions were made that echoed across lands and seas. You'll learn about the rise of Viking royalty, their courts, and the legends that still captivate us today. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a great hall, the firelight flickering on carved wooden beams, the murmur of voices discussing war, alliances, and laws. Could you hold the weight of a crown, guiding people through storms of change? Power was not given lightly among the Vikings. Leaders earned their place through strength, wisdom, and the respect of their people. The title of Jarl or chieftain was a prize hard won, often passed through bloodlines, but always tested by deeds. Some Viking leaders were fierce warriors, known for their prowess in battle. Others were skilled diplomats, weaving alliances through marriage and negotiation. Together, they formed the ruling class, balancing force and fairness to maintain order. One of the most famous of these leaders was Harald Fairhair, said to be the first king to unite much of Norway under his rule. His story, like many Viking tales, is a mix of history and legend, a reminder of the thin line between myth and reality in these old times. The courts of Viking kings were lively places, where feasts celebrated victories and alliances were sealed with mead and music. But beneath the laughter, decisions about war, justice, and succession were quietly shaping the destiny of peoples. Councils of elders and warriors advised the king, their voices carrying the wisdom of generations. Power was rarely absolute. Rulers had to listen to their counsels and honor the traditions that kept their people united. In this world of shifting loyalties, the crown was both a prize and a burden. Kings and queens faced threats from rival clans, foreign enemies, and even their own kin. To rule was to live on the edge of danger and ambition. Imagine the weight of responsibility resting on your shoulders, the eyes of your people watching your every move. Could you lead with strength and fairness, or would the crown become a chain? Asterisk among the many rulers who etched their names into Viking history. Few loom as large as Ragnar Lothbrok, a figure wrapped in fable and fact, whether he was one man or many. The sagas remember him as a bold raider, a cunning leader, and a father of legendary sons. His supposed journeys reached the shores of France and England, and his legacy would ripple across generations. Ragnar's sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake and Eye, were no less captivating. Each carved out his own path through blood and fire, commanding fleets of ships that darkened foreign horizons. Their stories remind us that Viking royalty was forged through deeds, not just names. But not all rulers sought glory through conquest. Some, like King Gorm, the Old of Denmark, and his son Harald Bluetooth, focused on unification and legacy. Harald, known for spreading Christianity and consolidating power, left behind more than just a name. He gave us one of the earliest known runestones, and centuries later, even a wireless technology bears his name. The process of becoming a king was never simple. There was no single ceremony, no crown passed by divine right. Instead, power was claimed, tested, and maintained through support from other jarls, military success, and loyalty from the people. Royal power among the Vikings was practical and decentralized. There were no stone palaces or glittering courts, like in medieval England or France. Instead, Viking kings ruled from longhouses, great timber, halls filled with warriors, advisors, and family. There, beneath high wooden rafters, laws were made, plans were forged, and loyalties were tested over cups of strong mead. In these halls, oaths were sacred. To break one was to court chaos and dishonor. Kings had to lead not only with sword and shield, but with fairness. A ruler who lost the trust of his people would find himself abandoned or worse, betrayed. Queens, too, held influence. While fewer in number, some wielded significant power. Women like Queen Ord, the Deepmite, remembered in Icelandic lore, were shrewd leaders and landholders in their own right. They negotiated marriages, settled disputes, and safeguarded the wealth of their families. It's worth imagining yourself here, walking softly through the halls of a Viking court. Could you navigate the alliances and rivalries, the politics whispered? Between bites of roasted boar, could you win the respect of proud warriors and stubborn elders? The Viking world did not bend easily to power. Leadership had to be earned again and again at sea, in court, and on the battlefield. A single misstep could mean rebellion, exile, or death, and yet the idea of kingship carried a lure. It offered a path to immortality, not just in life, but in story. The sagas recorded not the quiet, cautious leaders, but the bold, the wise, the unforgettable. Their stories echo still. Asterisk, the rise of Viking royalty was not just about individuals, it was also about the creation of systems, however loose and evolving. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of feudal Europe, Viking kings often ruled more by consensus than decree. Power radiated outward from the kings, longhouse, but had to flow through the respect of local jarls, warriors, and free farmers. A king could not simply demand obedience. He had to earn it by defending his people, distributing wealth fairly, and honoring his obligations. This was a delicate balance, maintained through feasting, gift-giving, and legal assemblies known as things. The Thing, free men gathered to discuss laws, settle disputes, and voice their grievances. Even kings were not above the law. Their decisions could be questioned, their leadership tested in front of all. This early form of participatory government gave the Viking world a unique flavor, one where even the most powerful had to listen. You can picture it now, a field cleared for gathering, the wind rustling through cloaks, voices rising in debate, the sun catching the tips of spears planted in the earth like silent sentinels. A young chieftain stands to speak, heart pounding, hoping to sway the crowd. Could you speak here, with the future in your hands and the past at your back? In many ways, these traditions laid the groundwork for later Scandinavian monarchies, but in the Viking Age, rule remained fluid, with borders that shifted as fast as the tides. A king might reign over several fjords and islands, or, through marriage and alliance, claim lands across the sea, and the sea was never far from Viking. Power, naval strength was the lifeblood of their kings. Control of the coasts meant control of trade, raids, and communication. Royal fleets, sleek longships, adorned with carved prows, were both tools of war and symbols of authority. These ships carried kings not only to battle, but to negotiations with foreign rulers. Viking royalty interacted with courts in England, Francia, and even Byzantium. Sometimes they came as enemies, sometimes as mercenaries, and occasionally as guests. Viking warriors served in the Byzantine Emperor's Varangian Guard, elite soldiers known for their loyalty and ferocity. In these faraway lands, Viking leaders saw how other monarchies worked. They brought back new ideas about taxation, administration, and religion. Slowly, the shape of Viking kingship began to change. Some embraced Christianity, both for spiritual reasons and to legitimize their rule in the eyes of powerful Christian neighbors. Others resisted, clinging to the gods of their ancestors. But the tide was turning, and with it, the image of the Viking king, no longer just a war chief or tribal leader, He was becoming something more, a monarch in the medieval sense, touched by divine favor and tasked with guiding a people through faith, law, and might. Still, the old values lingered. A king might wear a cross, but he still had to prove his strength. He had to feast with his warriors, settle disputes among kin, and lead when the sails were raised for war. And what of you? Would you have stood behind such a king or vied for his place? The lure of power is timeless, but in the Viking Age, it was tempered by risk, honor, and the ever-present sea. One wrong move, one winter without food, one failed raid, and all could be lost. Yet those who succeeded became more than rulers. They became stories. The sea was never a border for the Vikings. It was a road, a winding, blue path to the unknown. When you close your eyes and imagine the sound of a creaking longship, wood groaning under sail, you may think of war, of fierce warriors spilling onto foreign shores. But the truth was far more layered, more human. For the Vikings, to sail was to survive. It was to explore, to trade, to settle, to escape. The fjords of home, beautiful though they were, held limited land. Rocky soil, long winters, and growing populations meant that sometimes the only future lay beyond the horizon. So they built ships, not just any ships, but sleek, symmetrical, masterpieces that sliced through water like knives through silk. The longship became a symbol of freedom, ambition, and hunger for gold, for glory, for new beginnings. And so they set off. First to the east, they drifted into the riverways of what is now Russia and Ukraine. These rivers, the Dnieper, the Volga, carried them deep into the Slavic heartlands. They founded trade towns like Staraya, Ladoga, and Novgorod. They mingled with the local peoples. Some Vikings, the Varangians, even became rulers, forming the roots of what would one day become the Kievan Rus. Then they moved west. England, the soft green land of monasteries and sheepfolds. At first, the raids came like lightning. Monks fell beneath axes, and gold chalices vanished into shadowy sails. But in time, raids turned to settlements. They carved out kingdoms. The Danalar, a vast swath of England under Viking control, became a realm of Norse lore, Norse tongue, Norse dreams, and what of France? There, they found rich rivers and wary kings. In 911, the Viking warlord Rollo struck a deal with the Frankish King Charles the Simple. He was granted land, a gift, some called it, though it was more like a truce, sealed with coin and blood. That land became Normandy, and Rollo, once a raider, became a duke. His descendants would one day reshape Europe forever, most famously William the Conqueror. The Vikings didn't stop there. To the south they reached Spain and Portugal. They tested the defenses of Moorish cities, sometimes meeting fierce resistance, sometimes finding unlikely alliances. Their sails were seen near Gibraltar, where Europe meets Africa to the north. They reached the Faroe Islands, then Iceland, a stark, volcanic paradise, where settlers sought a life free from kings and blood feuds. There they wrote sagas, raised sheep, and kept the old gods alive in whispers and firelight. Even Greenland, a frozen, wind-blasted place, became a home to the boldest families. Led by Eric the Red, they carved farms into the ice-rimmed coastlines, clinging to survival through trade and stubborn will. And then, beyond all expectation, came the farthest reach of all, Vian land, somewhere on the shores of North America. Long before Columbus was born, Norse explorers set foot on a land of wild grapes and forests. They built a small settlement at Lonso Meadows, in what is now Newfoundland. They came with hope, but clashed with native peoples. The colony was short-lived, but it was real. They had crossed the Atlantic. Let that sink in. A people, with no compass, no maps, only the stars, and their own law, had found the new world. And yet, they did not stay. Why? Perhaps the land was too harsh. Perhaps the locals too strong. Perhaps their hearts were still tethered to the fjords of home. Whatever the reason, the dream of Vinland faded. But the legend endured, carved into stone, whispered in sagas, and echoed in every story of daring exploration since. And all the while, the Vikings weren't just taking, they were giving. They traded amber, walrus, ivory, and furs. In return, they took silk from Byzantium, spices from the east, and coins that bore foreign kings' faces. In the great markets of Hiddeby and Kopang, you could find Arab dirhams alongside Norse runes. The world was smaller than anyone had thought. The Vikings became middlemen in a web of trade that stretched from Baghdad to the Baltic. Some even traveled south to serve in the Byzantine Empire's Varangian Guard, an elite unit of axe-wielding warriors who guarded emperors and fought in glittering armor beneath the Mediterranean sun. Imagine that. A boy born beneath northern snow, now standing beneath golden domes, speaking a new tongue, but still dreaming of the wind off a Nordic. See. They were everywhere, not just as conquerors, but as neighbors. Not just as raiders, but as craftsmen, traders, storytellers, and settlers. And you, where would you have gone? Would you have boarded a long ship, chasing the promise of new land? Would you have traded in the markets of York, bartering amber for spices? Or would you have stayed behind, watching the horizon, waiting for a loved one to return? Not all who sailed came back, but many who left found more than they ever dreamed. And so, the story of the Vikings is not only written in blood and fire, but in footprints on foreign shores, and the laughter of children who spoke both Norse and English, Frankish, or Slavic. It is a story of connection, of courage, of finding a new home, even when the stars are unfamiliar. Asterisk. Yet for all their roaming, the Vikings never truly left behind the essence of who they were. Wherever they went, they carried stories. They carried the gods. Odin, who gave an eye for wisdom. Thor, who wielded the hammer that rumbled like storm clouds. Freya, who wept golden tears for love. In each new land, they carved runny stones, raised wooden poles called V, and whispered prayers into the cold morning air. Even in places where new religions took root, echoes of the old ways lingered, tucked inside customs, names, and hearts. In England, they left behind not only graves and artifacts, but names: Derby, Grimsby, Whitby, the by suffix meaning village or town in Old Norse. The Danor shifted English language and law itself. Children grew up bilingual with Norse, and Saxon blood mingling beneath freckled skin. In Ireland, Viking-founded cities like Dublin grew from muddy encampments into bustling ports. The Norse and Gaelic worlds collided, and sometimes beautifully intertwined. In Normandy, the Viking legacy was preserved through stone castles, tight-knit noble houses, and a new breed of warrior lords, Norman knights, who would go on to change the world in 1066. During the conquest of England, a Viking descendant took the crown of an Anglo-Saxon land, and the circle closed once more. But the story of Viking expansion was not only one of war and legacy, it was one of adaptation. When Vikings settled in Slavic lands, they often adopted local customs and titles. Some blended their pantheons, others married local women, changed their dress, and forged new identities. In Byzantium, Norse warriors learned Greek. In Iceland, they adopted democracy of a kind in the form of the Althing, the world's oldest surviving parliament. These were not rigid people. They were fluid, like water around stone, changing, shaped to suit the world they moved through, and through this fluidity they endured. But let's not forget the quiet stories, the ones not told in conquest, but in homes. Imagine a small farm in Normandy, where a Norse settler teaches his son how to sharpen a plough blade. Imagine a market in York, where a woman with Norse braids and a Saxon shawl sells hand-woven cloth. Imagine a Viking child in Dublin, chasing a Gaelic friend through the muddy alleys of the harbour, laughing in two languages. History tends to remember axes, but sometimes it's in those quiet exchanges that the truest revolutions unfold. Still, not everyone accepted the Viking presence. In many places, they were feared, not just for their weapons, but for their strangeness. Their gods were called demons by Christian monks. Their customs, cremation, blood feasts, and the taking of captives horrified the clergy. Priests wrote of them as punishments from God, scourges from the sea, and sometimes they were. Let's not soften the truth. Some raids were brutal. Monasteries burned. Entire towns disappeared. To be a Viking, sometimes, was to wield terror as a tool to strike fast and vanish before the wind changed. The fear they inspired opened doors that diplomacy could not. But that wasn't the whole picture. There were treaties signed, 2 marriages made, conversions, sincere or strategic, alliances formed in the strange twilight where enemies become brothers. Vikings were not just takers, they were builders. In places like Iceland, they brought livestock, tools, poetry. In Greenland, they braved impossible winters to carve life out of ice and wind. In England and Ireland, they built towns. With shipyards, workshops, and temples, they shaped governments, too. The thing their assembly travelled with them, a place where free men could speak, where disputes were settled, and where law had a voice louder than any sword. And they brought their sagas. Everywhere they went, they carried stories, passed from voice to ear, by hearth fire and on rainy decks. These tales kept their ancestors alive, the gods, the heroes, the monsters. Even now, long after their bones turn to dust, we hear them. We read the Eddas, we watch the stars, wondering what they saw. So perhaps expansion was not only about geography, perhaps it was about time, ensuring their stories would stretch far beyond the edge of their maps. And now, centuries later, you are hearing them again. Would you have sailed, if given the chance? Picture it, the morning fog lifting from the fjord, your ship packed with salted fish, furs, and hope. A carved dragon on the prow. Your heart pounding with equal parts dread and wonder. Could you leave the known behind for a whisper of something greater? Would the pull of the world outweigh the warmth of your hearth? The Vikings didn't always choose expansion. The snow falls quietly in the north, blanketing the earth like a shroud of peace. But beneath that silence, something stirs. In the dim dawn. Boots crunch on frostbitten ground. Metal glints faintly in the half-light. Not gold, but iron. Not decoration, but intention. A hand wraps around a hilt, worn smooth from years of practice. Leather creaks as it's fastened tight. A breath fogs in the morning air, and with it, a question: could you lift the axe? This is not the Viking of myth. Alone, not the cartoon brute or the reckless This is the warrior at rest and at ready. A figure shaped as much by duty as by steel, because in the Viking world, war was not chaos, it was a craft, and like all crafts in the Norse lands, it was born in the home. A child, perhaps you grows up hearing stories of glory, of ancestors who fought beside kings, of shields shattered and oaths kept. You watch your father hone blades, hear your mother remind him of who's waiting at home. Weapons are passed down like heirlooms, swords with names, spears with stories, even helmets that still carry the dents of old battles. You learn early. War is not a game. It is survival, it is pride, and it is responsibility. A Viking weapon was an extension of the self, not merely a tool, but a symbol. The axe was favored, affordable, effective, and terrifying. It could cut through shield and bone alike, but it also chopped wood, slaughtered animals, cleared land, an everyman's weapon, easy to carry, easy to wield. Swords were rarer, treasured, forged in fire and often inscribed with runes or foreign characters. Some were bought from Frankish traders, others looted. A sword told the world that its bearer was a person of status, someone to respect or to fear. Spears were common too, balanced for both throwing and stabbing, and the shield, round, wooden, rimmed with iron, was as vital as any blade. Vikings fought in formations, side by side, shields overlapping like scales of a serpent. It was not just brute strength, it was choreography. And then there were the berserkers, warriors cloaked in animal pelts, eyes wide with frenzy, charging into battle without armor. It's said they fought in a trance, immune to pain, possessed by the spirits of wolves or bears. Some say they chewed herbs or mushrooms to reach this state. Others believe it was rage, pure and unfiltered. You wonder, would you have stood beside one, or turned your eyes away, unsettled? But not all warriors were most were farmers, fishermen, traders, until called upon. Raiding wasn't a profession. It was a season, a rhythm, a way to fill the winter stores when crops had failed or coin had run dry. And despite the legends, raids weren't just wild, sprees of violence. They were planned, precise, often timed to tides and harvests. A ship might glide into a village at dawn, its crew slipping ashore in practiced silence. The target, a monastery, perhaps, rich in silver, poor in soldiers, or a rival settlement, weakened by infighting. Raiding was opportunistic, yes, but also strategic, and the longship was their greatest weapon of all, long, sleek, and shallow-bottomed. These vessels moved faster than anything else on water. They could skim over rivers, hug coastlines, vanish into inlets. Crews rowed with discipline, sails unfurled with sharp efficiency. The dragonheads carved at the prow were not just for show. They were intimidation visible from a mile away. Imagine seeing one from the shore. The sea calm, then suddenly, movement. A black silhouette cutting through the mist, like a serpent rising from the waves. The people around you panic. Some run, others freeze. You hear the oars hit water in rhythm, like the beat of a slow, heavy drum. The wind shifts, the dragon arrives, and then chaos. But back home, this act of violence feeds a family. The silver bought cattle, the cloth became clothing, the captured goods, or people, were traded or kept. In Iceland and Greenland, where resources were scarce, a single raid could mean the difference between starvation and survival. Were you born into a world that asked this of you? What would you do? It wasn't always pride. Sometimes it was desperation. Sometimes it was revenge. Feuds between families often erupted into violence. A slight, a stolen animal, an insult. Blood demanded blood. And in some cases, justice was sought not through courts, but through steel. The sagas are filled with such stories, of brothers avenging sisters, of fathers reclaiming honor, of warriors dying with names on their lips, and poetry in their hearts. Yes, poetry. Vikings believed that to die in battle was to be chosen, that your name would be sung, that Odin himself might welcome you to Valhalla, a hall of endless feasting and fighting, not as punishment, but as glory. And in this belief, they found courage. They did not fear death as we do. To them, death was a gateway, a continuation. To die with sword in hand was to rise with pride. Even so, death was not always noble. Many died in mud, or cold, or fear. Many never returned. And those left behind, the wives, the children, bore the weight of those choices. There is another side to war, and in the next part we will go deeper. Asterisk. Back in the village, when the longships returned, they brought not only treasure, but stories. Some were triumphs, retold around the hearth for years to come. Others were quieter, private burdens tucked into the silence between words. You can picture it. The docks crowded, the sun low, children on tiptoe to glimpse their fathers' faces. A mother's breath held tight until she sees her son. But for some, there is only absence. The empty space beside the fire, the bowl left untouched. The name that slips into memory. Loss is as old as war, yet even in sorrow, the rituals endure. A warrior's burial might be modest or magnificent. Some were laid in ships, surrounded by weapons, tools, and food, ready for the voyage to the afterlife. Others were burned on pyres or buried beneath mounds, where wildflowers would one day grow. There were whispers, too, of sacrifice. Not every death was from battle. In times of great need or to honor the gods, offerings were made. Animals, sometimes. People, we don't know how often. The evidence is scattered, the stories fragmented, but it is clear that Vikings believed deeply in the power of ritual. Blood, to them, was not always cruelty. It could be currency, a promise, a gift. This intertwining of the sacred and the violent is difficult for the modern mind. But to the Norse, war and worship were not opposites. They were neighbors. Odin, the Allfather, was both god of wisdom and war. He gave up an eye for knowledge, hung himself on the world tree for insight. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, flew across the world, gathering secrets. He favored the brave, the cunning, the sacrificial dot. To die with valor was to earn his gaze. And so war was more than survival. It was spiritual. This belief shaped everything, from how weapons were forged to how they were named. You might have held a sword called Legbiter or Widowmaker, a spear etched with runes for luck or vengeance. Armor passed from generation to generation, each dent a memory. But not all warriors were men. Stories abound of shield maidens, fierce women who fought alongside their brothers and husbands. Some are myth, others may be truth buried beneath. The sagas, recent graves have revealed female warriors buried with weapons, honored like any man. What does that tell you? That courage wore many faces, and yet most Viking women stayed home, not idle, but running the world behind the scenes. While men were away, women kept the farm, raised children, defended land. They knew how to fight if needed. They managed. trade, wrote poetry, and carried the stories of those who left and never came back. Some of those women chose to remain unmarried, wielding more power as landowners and matriarchs. Independence was not only possible, it was respected. And while we imagine the Viking world as dominated by blades, it was sustained by those who never touched one. Still, the warrior's path beckoned many. Training started young, wrestling, hunting, rowing. Not just strength, but resilience. To bear cold, hunger, pain. To listen, to move as one. You, born into this world, would be tested constantly. Not just by your peers, but by nature itself. Would you have survived the winter? Would your blade stay steady? Or would you be the one to tend the fire, to wait at the shore, wondering whose face the sea might carry back? War was not constant, but its shadow stretched far. Even in peace, the threat lingered. Villagers posted lookouts, walls were built, alliances forged. Not every Viking fought Vikings, but many did. Feuds between chieftains, territorial skirmishes, betrayals. The same longships that brought fortune could also bring fire in the north. Survival required flexibility. Today you traded, tomorrow you raided. The line was thin, and so Viking warcraft was more than just the clash of weapons. It was preparation, navigation, observation, knowing when to strike and when to stay still. Many raids succeeded, not by strength, but by timing. A monastery with no guards, a coastal town low on soldiers, a chieftain distracted by another. Enemy, you picture it now, standing at the bow of a ship, wind in your face. The shore ahead, the world behind. Would you hesitate? Would you go ashore, or stay aboard, praying the others would return? You might think you know the answer, but the sea changes everyone. Some came back richer, others came back broken, some didn't come back at all. The cost of war wasn't just blood spilled, it was innocence lost, friendships broken, homes left behind. And yet for many it was worth it, because glory in the Viking age was not given, it was taken, and those who took. Back in the longhouse, the fire crackles low. The warriors speak little now, their tales have been told, their wounds seen too. What lingers in the stillness is not the thrill of conquest, but the weight of return. After all, when a man leaves for battle, something always changes. The world is not the same. He is not the same, and the ones left behind feel it too. It's here, in this quiet, that the deeper truths of Viking warcraft revealed themselves. Victory was never just about gold or territory. It was about story. To be remembered was to live on, not in body, but in song. The skalds, Viking poets, carried these memories around fires, in mead halls, at ceremonies. They recited the names of the fallen, the deeds of the brave, and the wisdom of the gods. Their words gave shape to legacy. You hear the rhythm of their verses now, the pounding of feet on the deck of a ship, the clash of axe and shield, the final cry of a warrior whose name would echo long after his bones turned to dust. Skalds didn't just entertain, they preserved truth, or at least a version of it. Their songs stitched history and myth together, forming a tapestry where even the smallest act could gain grandeur with time. You might be surprised at what they included, not only the boldest raids and greatest battles, but also stories of hesitation, sacrifice, and cleverness. The warrior who spared a foe, the child who grew to avenge a fallen parent, the elder who held a gate just long enough for others to escape, because in the Viking mind, glory was not limited to bloodshed. It was also found in resilience, in cunning, in loyalty, even in grief. Some of the most honored warriors were those who faced defeat and returned wiser, and some never sought war at all, but were drawn into it by honor, by duty, or by desperation. The line between hero and victim was often blurred, and the gods, watching from above, didn't always favor the strongest. Consider Thor, protector of humankind, wielder of Mjolnir. Yes, he was powerful, but he was also kind, often mocked in tales for being too quick, too angry, too predictable. He was loved, not because he was perfect, but because he was relatable. Then there was Tyr, the one-handed god of justice, who placed his hand in the mouth of the wolf Fenrir, knowing it would be bitten off. He did so to uphold a promise. A warrior, after all, was not only a fighter, he was a keeper of oaths. Could you live like that? Could you make decisions where honor outweighed safety, where reputation meant more than rest, where you'd rather die, remembered, than live forgotten? In your world now, comfort is common, but in theirs it was rare, earned, defended. Every weapon carried weight, every journey risked ruin, and every act, great or small, echoed across generations. The sagas remind us that war was never the point. It was a means. The real goal, survival, reputation, the securing of family, land, and legacy. But for some, battle became identity. Berserkers, those wild, transbound fighters, may have used herbs, chants, or sheer belief to summon inhuman strength. They were feared even by their own kin. Their rage was divine, their control questionable. To be a berserker was to dance with madness, and yet they were honored, not for their predictability, but for their willingness to lose themselves in pursuit of a higher cause. Not everyone understood them. Even fewer could become them, would. It's worth wondering. In a world where violence was art, faith, and survival combined, who would you become? The farmer turned defender, the skald turned hero, the quiet one who surprised everyone as dawn breaks on the fjord, and the warriors rise from slumber, sharpening blades and tightening cloaks. The answer is yours to imagine. You, standing at the edge of the village, wind in your hair. You, staring down the horizon, wondering what's next. Would you go? Would you fight? Or would you stay, telling stories of the ones who did? There is no wrong path, only different songs, and each Viking warrior or weaver, sailor or seer, added their verse to the endless saga. So let your mind rest now, knowing you've walked with them, heard the clang of steel, the crackle of fire, and the murmur of stories shared under starlit skies. This was war. Yes, but also life, belief, and memory. A world both distant and familiar. And it lives on now in you, in this quiet moment, where fire once burned and still does, softly in your thoughts. Loke. Out in the north, where the wind rolls down the fjords and dances through spruce forests. The Viking world was born not with a roar, but with a whisper. Snow blanketed the mountains in silence, and the rivers ran slow under sheets of ice. This was a land of stone and water, of long winters and short, fierce summers. A land that tested the body and shaped the spirit. You feel the cold as they felt it, not as an enemy, but as a constant companion. It was in the creak of wooden beams overhead, the crunch of frost beneath fur-lined boots, the biting air that kissed their cheeks awake. Before dawn, This is where it all began. Before the sails, before the sword, Scandinavia in the early days, long before, Viking raids and kingship was a place ruled by the rhythm of nature. Thick forests cradled sleepy hamlets. Mountain ridges split the sky like jagged runes. The sea, ever present, was not just a barrier but a road, and the people, hardy, humble, and quietly fierce. Most families lived in small, wooden longhouses. These were warm, smoky places, low and wide, with turf roofs and a single room where generations lived together. You would have slept shoulder to shoulder with kin, warmed by fire and the breathing of cattle brought indoors for the winter. There was no privacy, only closeness. Their days began early. Before the sun rose, a mother stirred the embers back to life. Children shuffled from the bedding straw to fetch water or feed the livestock. Men checked traps or walked out into the dark with axes, seeking wood or game. And yet, it wasn't all hardship. There was laughter too, the joy of surviving another night, of carving wooden toys, of stories told in the firelight. Could you live like that, in a place where survival was the victory? Their meals were simple: oats, barley, and rye made thick, porridge or flatbread, stews bubbled with what could be caught or grown, rabbit, roots, cabbage, or fish pulled from icy rivers. Fermented milk, called skaya, gave nourishment. Honey was treasured, salt a luxury. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. The year turned not by calendar, but by season. Spring meant hope, planting time, new lambs, fresh herbs. Summer brought long days and hard work, but also festivals under the midnight sun. Autumn, a flurry of harvesting and storing. Winter, ... long and dark. That's when the stories mattered most. They believed the world was forged in fire and ice, that the gods lived above in Asgard, and that fate was spun by Norns at the roots of the world tree. Their religion wasn't gentle. It didn't promise ease. It offered purpose to live bravely, to honor kin, to meet death with open eyes. You can almost hear the crackle of the fire as an elder speaks of Odin, the All-Father who gave his eye for wisdom, of Thor, the thunder god, protector of mankind, of Loki, the trickster whose chaos always came at a price, of Freya, the goddess of love and war. These gods weren't perfect. They were like the people, flawed, fierce, and resilient. And the people did not worship in temples, but in sacred groves, by waterfalls. At stones older than memory, do you think you'd have found comfort in those stories? When snow covered the land and wolves howled beyond the hills, children grew. Up fast by 6 or 7, they had chores. Boys helped in the fields, or learned to carve and fight. Girls gathered herbs, spun wool, tended animals. There was no childhood as you know it, only the slow introduction to duty and to cold, still. There was warmth, not just of fire, but of family, of songs sung softly on dark nights, of woolen mittens passed down through generations, of shared stories, shared tasks, and shared hopes. They feared little, but they respected much. The sea, the spirits, the cycles of life. Everything had its place. In these quiet centuries, they were not yet called Vikings. They were not simply living. But the seeds were planted, in the scrape of blade on wet stone, in the boy staring at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond the waves, in the woman watching flocks, who knew how to survive with nothing but her hands and her will. This is where your journey begins, not with battle cries, but with silence, with the cold morning and the quiet breath of someone just waking in a longhouse, somewhere north of nowhere. The seasons in ancient Scandinavia were not just changes in weather, they were transformations of life itself. When the snow melted, rivers swelled, and the earth sighed beneath bare feet. Spring was the season of survival rewarded. The sheep began to lamb, and the cows gave milk again. Men and women planted barley in neat rows, their hands aching from the cold that still lingered in the soil. Children ran freely, chasing birds and laughing into the wind. The lop houses, once dim and smoky, were opened to let in the fresh air. Tools were repaired, sails were mended. The people were not idleness. There was no time for idleness, but spring brought with it a rare lightness of heart, and yet there was always preparation in their joy, because the Norse knew that winter would always return, that the gods themselves lived in the shadow of an eventual end, Ragnarok, the great doom that even they could not escape. Perhaps that's why they cherished what they had. The community was the bedrock of Norse life. Families weren't small. A household might include several generations, plus farmhands, servants, and even freed thralls who had earned their place. Neighboring farms formed tight-knit clusters, watching out for one another, sharing knowledge, stories, and sometimes food when crops failed. There were no kings, not yet. Leadership came from within the clan. The oldest man or woman held authority, and decisions were made through discussion, not decree. Disputes were settled at the thing, a kind of assembly where every free person could speak. Imagine it a ring of stones on a hilltop, men and women wrapped in cloaks, the wind stirring their hair as they debate justice under a grey sky. The Norse weren't barbarians. They had laws, they had poetry, they had structure, but they also had hardship, and the harshness that comes from living in a land that offers little and demands everything. And from that hardship, something began to stir. You can picture the boy, maybe 10 years old, standing on the shore with his father. They're mending a fishing net. The boy looks out to sea, squinting at the horizon. He asks, "What's beyond?" His father shrugs. "More sea," he says. "Maybe land, maybe monsters, maybe gods." And the boy thinks, maybe I'll go. This was the seed of the Viking spirit. Not conquest, not greed, but curiosity, the need to know, the longing to see more than trees and fjords, to find what's beyond the blue line where sky meets water. As the centuries passed, the Norse began to build better boats, sleek, curved vessels with dragon-headed prows. They could slip through shallow rivers and dance over ocean waves. They were fast, silent, deadly if need be. But more importantly, they were keys. Keys to the world. You'll see these ships again, filled with warriors and traders, poets and raiders. But for now, they're just being born. The idea is new, a whisper in the back of someone's mind. Not everyone will go. Many will stay behind, tending goats, weaving cloth, singing lullabies to children under fur blankets. Their lives, though quieter, are no less vital. They are the roots, holding fast while others become the wind. Could you live that life? Day after day, sunrise to moonrise, in rhythm with the land. It wasn't easy, but it was real, tangible, honest. By midsummer, the days stretched so long, it felt as if night had forgotten to return. Bonfires were lit, offerings made to God of fertility, in hopes of good harvests. Mead flowed like laughter, Songs rose into the twilight. You'd feel it, the joy, the closeness, the strength of a people bound together by hardship and hope. But always there was an edge to their joy, a sense that nothing lasted, because winter was always coming back. The wolves would howl again, the snow would smother the ground, and you'd huddle close to the fire, listening to the old ones tell of frost giants and end times. And yet, they never stopped living. They built, they loved, they dreamed. Even knowing it would all end, they kept going, because that was their way, to defy the cold, not with rage, but with warmth, with kinship, with stubbornness, with song. This is the cradle of the Viking Age, a world of contrasts, brutal and beautiful, silent and song-filled, a place where the sea calls and the land holds fast, where life is short, but lived fully. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the creak of wood, the low hum of voices, and the soft rhythm of footsteps through snow, because the past never truly disappears. It only sleeps, waiting for you to find it again. By autumn, the air sharpened. The trees, those ancient watchmen of the north, began to turn. Leaves rustled like whispered secrets, and the sky took on that heavy grey you could feel behind your eyes. It was time to reap what the earth had given, and what it had refused. The harvest was not a celebration of abundance. Not always. For many, it was a test of how well they had prepared, how fairly the weather had treated them. A good harvest meant full bellies, trade opportunities, maybe even a winter with stories instead of hunger. A poor one meant hard choices. Barley was common, ground into porridge or baked into rough bread. If you were fortunate, you might have oats or rye. Vegetables came from the earth. Onions, turnips, cabbage, dried herbs, flavored stews when they were available. Most days, meals were simple. A thick soup cooked over the central fire, maybe with salted fish or bits of dried meat. The rich ate differently, but even they could not feast without the land's permission. Wealth in these lands wasn't gold, it was grain, cattle, land. The ability to survive winter, and winter always arrived. It didn't knock. It didn't wait. The snow came early some years, wrapping the longhouses in white. You'd hear it, the creak of ice settling on the roof, the soft thud of drifts against the wooden walls. Inside, the family drew closer. The fire never went out, not once. It was a heartbeat. Without it, life would wither. They passed the time weaving cloth, carving wood, preparing tools. Children learned by watching. Grandparents told stories, not just for amusement, but to teach. Tales of gods and monsters, of brave men and clever women, of Loki's tricks, Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength. Stories were not entertainment. They were memory, identity, armor against the cold. There were no schools, no scrolls. History lived in mouths and ears, passed from one generation to the next, like a sacred breath. And while they told those tales, they listened always, for sounds outside, wolves, storms, hunger knocking at someone else's door, because not every family would survive the winter. That was the unspoken truth, the quiet fear behind every laugh. If your stores ran low, if your animals sickened, if your firewood ran out, there was no one to save you. You had neighbors, yes, but they had mouths to feed too. Charity could be the difference between life and death, not just for the starving, but for those who gave. This was not cruelty. This was necessity. a life balanced on a knife's edge. And yet, they endured. They endured because they had each other. Because even the coldest nights could be warmed by a shared story. A bowl of broth, a hand held in silence. You might imagine now, lying in your bed, warm and safe, what it would feel like to live like that, to wrap yourself in wool, your breath curling in the frozen air, to wake with frost on your lashes and still get up to feed the animals, to lose a harvest and keep going, to bury a child and still sing lullabies to the next. Could you do it? That's not a judgment, just a question, because every Viking, before they set sail, before they swung a sword, had to live through this first. The proving ground wasn't the battlefield, it was the homestead. The forging happened in silence, in repetition, in hardship accepted without complaint. That's where the strength came from. That's where the legends were born. In time, the winters turned to seasons of their own rhythm, not just for survival, but for thought. With fields buried under snow and days shortened to dim grey slivers of time, the Norse turned inward. Not only inward toward family and fire, but inward in spirit. It was during these long dark months that the old tales flourished. You'd sit with them now, if you were there. Around the hearth, wool blankets pulled close, the air scented with wood smoke and tallow. Someone, maybe an uncle or grandmother, begins the tale. Not hurried, not loud, calm, intentional. Each word a step deeper into memory they speak of. The 9 worlds, connected by the great ash tree Yggdrasil of Asgard, where gods walked. Of Midgard, the world of men, your world. They tell how Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom, how the world was born from the body of a frost giant, and how it will end in fire and ice. These stories weren't just myths, they were truths dressed in poetry. They explained why the world hurt, why the sun returned, why dreams mattered. They told of fate, of word, an invisible thread spun for every soul. It could not be escaped, only met with courage. Can you feel it? The stillness of the room, the way even children fall silent when the Norns are mentioned, the 3 fates who spin, measure and cut the lives of gods and men alike. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, the stories continue. Some of them aren't about gods at all. They're about ancestors, a brave grandmother who faced wolves, a great uncle who walked to the sea and never came back. These stories, too, are sacred. They are the warmth beneath the wool. By now, you understand that this world wasn't quiet by accident. It was made quiet by choice, by need. Too much. Noise meant something was wrong. A broken fence, a bear in the woods. Silence was safety. But in that silence lived depth. They knew their place in the world, even if the world was harsh. And then spring returns, not all at once. It begins as a dripping, snow softening at the edges, a bird call, a crack of sunlight through grey. Slowly, the longhouses breathe again, doors open. Children run outside barefoot for the first time in months. The world does not welcome them warmly, but it allows them, and that is enough. Planting begins again. Barley, flax, beans. The cycle continues, and as the generations pass, changes arrive. Not all change comes with fanfare. Some of it walks quietly into the village. A new tool, a strange accent, a bit of silver that came from far away. Norse traders began to journey further, to lands warmer and richer. They brought back news and goods, and sometimes ideas. A whispered report of soft-skinned men across the sea, of temples filled with gold, of weak kings who bathe instead of fight. The old men laugh, but the younger ones, they think a plan begins, to form not in greed, but in possibility. They look to their ships, they test their oars, they speak in low voices about the moon tides and how far they might carry a man. The Viking Age did not begin with a roar, it began with a murmur, a restless spirit rising out of a frozen land. A people who had already survived the hardest test, living in a place that tried to kill them every year. So they asked themselves, if we can survive this, what else could we do? You feel it now, don't you? The deep breath before something changes, the pause before the first sail is raised. The north wind is blowing, and the world is about to hear it. And so, with winter behind them and the wind shifting once more, the Norse people turned their eyes toward the horizon. What once seemed like an endless boundary, the cold sea, the thick forest, the jagged mountain, began to look more like an invitation. This is where their world widened. This is where the longships began to whisper, "Now drift with me." As we step aboard the decks of carved dragon-prowed vessels, and let the waves carry us into the next chapter of the Viking saga. Asterisk, asterisk. Close your eyes and listen to the water. Imagine standing at the edge of a fjord, where the cliffs rise steep and dark, and the sea is a silver mirror stretched into forever. The tide laps gently at the shore, tugging at the stones, whispering secrets only the bold are meant to hear. This is the sound that stirred something in the hearts of Norsemen and women. They were never meant to stay land-bound. The forest gave them wood, the wind gave them direction, the sea gave them purpose. The longship, that iconic silhouette with its fierce prow and slender frame, was more than just a vessel. It was an extension of their will, light enough to carry across land, swift enough to outrun danger, strong enough to cross oceans. Each one was a masterpiece of design, built from oak, pine, and ash trees that once stood tall in northern soil. The ships were shaped by hand, each plank overlapped and riveted with iron nails. The ribs of the ship curved like the bones of a beast, flexible but firm, alive in a way. They were carved with care, sometimes with runes, sometimes with beasts, dragons, serpents, wolves etched into the prow to strike fear or awe depending on who saw them. To sail in one was to feel the sea beneath your feet, not through thick decks, but through the shallow grace of the hull itself. These ships didn't crash through waves, they skimmed across them like arrows, silent, swift, elegant. The people who sailed them were not always raiders. That's the story often told of horned warriors screaming into battle. But no, that came later. First, they were fishermen, traders, explorers. A man might rise before dawn, walk barefoot over frost-covered grass, and check the mooring ropes of his family's boat. His sons would carry baskets. His daughter might carry rope. They'd push off into the morning mist, the boat cutting across the calm water out there. Fish meant survival. They knew the tides like you might know your street. They watched the birds when they circled, it meant herring below. Nets were cast, oars dipped silently. Later, those same hands that fed families would grip spears. But that came with time. First came curiosity. First came stories of monks who lived by the sea, of southern markets overflowing with spices and cloth, of lands with warmer summers and softer soil. So they ventured. At first, it was short hops, from fjord to fjord, from one coastline to another, testing the winds, learning the sky, reading the stars, because they had no maps. The sun and the birds and the color of the water were their compass. Some died. The sea is not kind to those who rush her, but some returned, and they returned with things, coins, beads, glass, foreign wool, bits of silk, and tales. Oh, the tales they told, of cities made of stone, of churches filled with gold, of markets where no one had ever heard the name Odin, and back home, as the fire cracked and the meat flowed, others listened and wanted more. You can feel it, can't you? The way adventure tugs at the soul, even now, lying in your bed, safe and still. You can imagine the creak of the ship beneath you, the smell of salt, the slap of sail catching wind, the sting of cold spray on your cheeks. Could you have gone? Could. You have left the only land you knew, trusting only wood and wind, because that is what they did. Not just once, but again and again. When you sailed in a longship, you became part of something larger, a crew not only bound by rope and wood, but by trust. There were no cabins, no private rooms. You slept shoulder to shoulder with the others, wrapped in furs, rocking gently. With the current, your pillow might be your boots, your blanket a bearskin. When it rained, you stayed wet. When the sun scorched, you bore it in silence. Meals were simple: dried fish, flat bread, bits of smoked meat, sometimes porridge, thick and heavy with barley, fresh water stored in barrels, passed carefully from hand to hand, and if you were lucky, a sip of mead to warm your chest. There were no lanterns. At night, the moon was your guide, and if clouds covered the sky, you trusted the helmsman, who trusted the sea. Each person had their task. Some rowed, others repaired sails, or cooked, or kept lookout. No one was idle. No one could afford to be. You might have envied the youngest, those tasked with watching the horizon, who could stand tall and breathe the salt air until you realized they also had the job of spotting danger first. A storm, a reef, a rival sail. Fear was never far from the mind. There were pirates, even then, rival Norse clans who preyed upon each other, and coastal defenses, men who'd learned to watch for the shape of a dragon-headed prow. And yet, they kept going, because the rewards were real. The coasts of the British Isles, the rivers of Francia, even the icy routes north toward the White Sea. If a place could be reached by water, they found a way. Some ships held traders, men and women alike, with wares laid out on woven mats, walrus ivory, amber beads, furs from the coldest forests. In exchange, they brought back wine, silk, spices, gold, even ideas. Other ships held warriors, but not in armor. No, this was not the world of plate and polish. These were lean men, wrapped in mail shirts or thick wool, bearing axes, and round shields, with blades that had been sharpened by fathers and grandfathers. Their goal was not chaos. It was opportunity. A monastery, barely defended, might yield more silver in an hour than a month of farming back home. Still, the violence wasn't taken lightly. Many prayed before battle, not only to Odin for victory, but to Thor for strength, or Frey for mercy. They believed what they did had consequences beyond this life, and after. If they survived, they returned with riches, not only of wealth, but of pride. Imagine the celebration, the ship gliding into the fjord at dusk, families rushing to the shore, children running barefoot, shouting, elders nodding slowly. The crew climbs out, salt-crusted and weary. They carry their stories in their eyes, their scars, their silence. Not all who left came back. Some found new lands and never returned. Others lie beneath foreign soil, marked by stones none here would ever see. But their memory lived on, songs were made, runes carved. And the longship, once again, stood ready, waiting for the next voyage. Asterisk, the sea was not only a path to plunder, it was a road to something more permanent, a new life as the decades passed. The longships began to carry more than warriors and traders. They carried families, carpenters, weavers, blacksmiths, dreamers, people who no longer just wanted to visit the world, but to live in it. And so the Vikings began to settle. In the north of what is now England, small wooden towns sprang up near the rivers. In Ireland, they built long forts, fortified dock settlements, where ships could anchor safely and trade, could thrive. In Scotland and the Isles, they raised farms, built halls, and named places that still bear their touch today. And across the wide sea, they reached Iceland, cold, volcanic, barren to some eyes, but to the Norse it was a blank canvas, rich in fish, sheep, space, a place where chieftains could rule without interference, a place where sagas could be born. They built turf-roofed homes, thick-walled, warm, embedded into the earth. Smoke curled from central hearths, where women stirred porridge in the mornings and men hung damp cloaks to dry after the hunt. Neighbors were days away, so they relied on each other, shared tools, gathered together for feasts, told stories by firelight of gods, monsters, heroes, and the places they had left behind. Even farther west came Greenland, and perhaps most astonishing of all, Vinland. They crossed the Atlantic. Before the famous voyages of later centuries, Viking ships touched the shores of what we now call North America. They didn't stay long, but they were there. You can still find the remnants, stones, tools, weathered by time, whispering that the Norse once stepped on a very different continent. Back in the east, trade routes flourished along the rivers of what is now Russia and Ukraine. Norse traders, called Varangians, followed winding currents deep into Slavic lands. They traded with Byzantine merchants in silk robes, prayed in Orthodox cathedrals, saw marble streets and soaring domes. Some became bodyguards to emperors. The Varangian Guard, tall, fair-haired warriors, were feared and honored in Constantinople. Imagine a Viking standing watch beside golden walls, far from the fjords of his childhood. He speaks little of the language, but his axe is sharp, his loyalty unquestioned. It's almost dreamlike, isn't it? To imagine someone born among snowy pines and howling winds, ending their days beneath olive trees and azure skies. But that was the Viking. World vast, interconnected, and always in motion. Not everyone left home, of course, but those who did reshaped everything they touched through trade. They brought new ideas of coinage, religion, architecture. Through settlement, they laid the foundation for future kingdoms. Through travel, they reminded the world that the North was not silent. It had stories to tell, and they told them in stone and song and sail. Could you have lived that way, knowing that every journey might be your last, that winter might find your home empty when you return, that what you build today might be ash tomorrow, and yet to see things no one else you know had seen, to walk streets in foreign lands, to taste wines from distant grapes, to return with silk tied around your arm and tales on your lips. Some chose comfort, The Vikings chose motion. Asterisk. Change doesn't always announce itself with trumpets or storms. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like mist rolling over the waves, and before anyone realizes, the world is different. So it was with the Vikings. The longships came back, but they returned with more than silver. They returned with customs, languages, beliefs, with stories of foreign gods, foreign kings, foreign laws, and slowly the Norse world shifted. Imagine a small village on the Norwegian coast. A trader's son returns home after 2 years in the east. He wears a tunic embroidered with Eastern patterns. He speaks with an accent learned from Slavs and Greeks. He brings with him coins, stamped not with runes, but Latin script. His brothers listen to him speak. His father listens in silence. And though they still raise their horns to Odin, something has changed. In time, some of those changes became permanent. Christianity began to take hold. Not everywhere, not all at once, but steadily. Missionaries came by land and sea, and some chieftains, seeing opportunity, accepted baptism in exchange for alliances, for trade benefits, for peace. Wooden idols were buried. Crosses were raised. Old gods still lingered in the shadows, whispered to in forests, honored with quiet offerings. But the tides were turning. Laws began to be written down. Once, a man's word was enough. A saga spoken at the thing, the great assembly. Now parchments bore decisions. Signatures replaced oaths. Authority took new shapes. And yet, beneath it all, the spirit remained. Even a baptized Viking, walking the streets of Dublin or Kiev, carried something older within him. Something primal, rooted in snow, sea, and story. Their children would inherit a different world, one of cities, kings, borders, but they would still dream of longships, of stars above the open ocean, of the wind at their back, and a horizon that never stayed still. You lie back now, thinking of all this, the way a people can stretch across the map, not just in conquest, but in curiosity. How a village, tucked between fjords, could give rise to a legacy that shaped continents. Long before battles, before ships kissed foreign shores, before names were etched into sagas, there was home, the hearth, the heartbeat of a Viking's world. You can picture it now. A sturdy longhouse, its sloping roof thick with turf to keep. Out the wind, the walls made from timber and sod, darkened by years of smoke and soot. Chickens cluck quietly outside. A cow moos somewhere near the byre. Snow crunches softly underfoot as someone moves toward the door. Inside, warmth. The fire burns low in the center of the hall, its smoke curling upward through a hole in the roof. Around it, life hums gently. A woman stirs a thick stew in an iron cauldron, its scent rich with barley herbs and a hint of smoked fish. Children whisper near the walls, wrapping small fingers around carved wooden toys. A man sharpens his knife beside the flames, pausing, now and then to watch the sparks dance. You'd think life here would be harsh, and yes, it was, but it was also deeply rooted, filled with rhythm and purpose. Each person knew their place, their role. And though the winters were long and the nights darker still, there was comfort in that clarity. The longhouse was shared not just by a single family, but often by several. You'd live, eat, sleep, and work in the same space. Privacy wasn't something expected. You learned to find quiet moments amid the noise, in the hush before dawn, in the silence of snow falling outside. Beds were built into the walls, wooden frames, stuffed with straw and covered in wool blankets. The youngest curled closest to the fire, the elders too. Those in between took what space they could. Meals were simple but sustaining. In the morning, bread made from rye or barley, maybe with butter if the cows were milking. During the day, dried meats, root vegetables, or a hot broth thickened with beans. In summer, fresh herbs added bursts of flavor. In winter, salted fish was a constant companion, and always ale. Not the kind to dull the senses, but brewed weak and sour, safe to drink when water was not. Mead was reserved for celebrations, sweet, golden, warming. Everyone worked. Children fetched water, tended goats, learned quickly to mend and carry. By 10 winters old, a child might already be entrusted with small tools or a bow. Boys followed, their fathers into the woods or fields. Girls learned to spin flax, weave wool, and grind grain with heavy stone quans. There was no idle time. From sunrise to dusk, the day was filled with tasks. Mending clothes, shaping iron, carving bone tools, churning butter. Every item you owned had likely passed through your own hands or those of someone you loved. Craft was not simply a necessity, it was pride. A well-made cloak dyed with woad, or madder, said something about your home. A sharp knife, handed from father to son, spoke of care. And jewelry, oh how it glittered, even in the humblest home. Not for show, but for meaning. Brooches fastened cloaks. Arm rings showed loyalty, or favor. Beads were strung in colors that whispered of trade and treasure. And when the day's labor was done, they told stories. The skalds, poets, and keepers of memory might not live in every home, but stories lived in every voice. By firelight, with a child curled against your side, you'd hear of Thor's hammer, of Loki's tricks, of the time a neighbor chased a goat across half the village. Laughter, memory, song, these were the walls that held the longhouse together. Asterisk life in a Viking village did not move to the beat of hours and minutes. It flowed with the seasons, with the sun, the frost, the pull of the earth. In spring, the soil awakened. You can almost feel it now, the ground softening beneath the thawing snow. Men turned the fields with wooden plows, drawn by oxen. Women scattered seeds with practiced hands, singing low to keep rhythm with the breeze. Children chased each other between rows, their laughter rising like birdsong. Spring was work, but it was also hope, the return of warmth, of green, of life. In summer, the days stretched long. There were few true nights, just twilight melting into dawn. This was the season of gathering, of fishing, of journeying. Some would sail for trade or raiding, gone for weeks or months. Others tended animals, collected herbs, repaired nets, thatched roofs, and everywhere food. Strawberries in the forest, mussels from the shore, honey from wild hives. Meals became feasts, even when humble. Flatbreads cooked on hot stones, stews, made with fresh leeks, and soft cheese wrapped in leaves. In autumn, the world turned gold. The final harvest, apples, turnips, beans, everything gathered, dried, stored in cellars or hung from rafters. The animals not strong enough for winter were slaughtered, their meat smoked and salted. Blood was used, too, for sausage, for stews, for sacred rituals. Honoring the gods, there was no waste, only preparation. And when winter came, stillness. The sea froze near the shore. Roads vanished beneath drifts. Smoke curled from every longhouse roof. And inside, life drew close, spinning wool, mending clothes, whispering stories beneath the weight of furs. There was silence, yes, but not loneliness. Families huddled together. You would have, too. There is a kind of closeness that only comes when fire is your only light, and the storm outside is your only sound. Roles were clear, but not always rigid. A man might tend to sheep if his wife was ill. A woman might wield a sword if her home was threatened. Strength was respected, but so was wisdom, cleverness, kindness. The elderly were cherished. They knew the old tales, the forgotten herb that soothed a cough, the prayer that kept a storm at bay. Children listened closely when grandparents spoke, not because they were told to, but because something ancient stirred in their voices. Weddings were sacred, not simply between two people, but between families. Gifts exchanged, oaths spoken, ale poured in offering. A new union meant new strength, two hearths becoming one, a weaving of lineage, land and story, and funerals. They were not just grief, they were honor, whether a humble burial with grave, goods tucked gently beside the body, or a fiery send-off on a pyre or ship. Death was not an end. It was a journey to Valhalla, to Hel. To the place where ancestors waited with open arms. Life was brief, often brutal, but it was never meaningless. You start to wonder now, nestled in your own stillness. Could you have lived this life? Could you rise before dawn every day, no matter the season? Could you carry water in the cold, tend sheep in the sleet, grind grain until your palms blistered? Could you stand shoulder to shoulder at the thing your voice added to the law? Could you love so fiercely that you'd burn a ship for someone you lost? This was daily life, not of kings, not of heroes, but of the many, the farmers, the weavers, the hunters, the healers, the ones who lit the fires each morning and banked the coals each night, the ones whose names didn't make it into sagas, but whose hands shaped the world just the same, asterisk. Even in the hardest winters, even in years when crops withered or the sea gave nothing back, the Vikings still found reasons to gather, to feast, to laugh, to remember they were not just survivors, but a people bound by purpose. Their celebrations were not constant, but when they came, they filled the halls with warmth that lingered for days. Take Yule, for example, the midwinter festival. You can imagine the scene, snow pressing thick against the longhouse walls, and yet, inside, the world was alive. Fir branches strung above the door, firelight gleaming off bronze brooches and bright textiles. Spiced ale passed from hand to hand, roasted boar steaming on wide wooden platters. This was more than a meal. It was an act of defiance, a promise that the dark would not win, that the sun would rise again. The wheel of the year turned with these moments. Winter solstice, spring planting, summer sun, autumn harvest. Each season had its place in the cycle, and with it, offerings to the gods. You would place bread on a stone, pour milk onto the ground, whisper a hope into the wind. Small things, but meaningful. And when it came time for justice, that too was a kind of ritual. The thing, the gathering of free people to make decisions and settle disputes, was held in the open air. No grand halls, just the land and the law. Here, voices rose, not in rage, but in reason. If you'd been there, you might have stood on the edge of the crowd, listening as elders spoke, as neighbors recounted what they'd seen. as someone pounded the butt of a spear into the earth to silence the arguments. Punishments were harsh. Yes, banishment, fines, even death. But the goal was peace, balance, a society held together not by fear, but by shared understanding. You might have feared that moment, standing before the thing, but you also might have taken comfort in it, knowing your voice was heard, knowing justice was not hidden behind palace walls, but spoken aloud. Beneath the sky, there was spiritual rhythm in every corner of daily life. When a child was born, water was poured over their head in a quiet blessing. When someone died, their body was washed, wrapped, and laid with tokens of their life tools. Beads, weapons, love, and the gods. They were everywhere, not just in temples, though some places had shrines of stone and timber, but in the trees, the rivers, the thunder overhead. You might have carried a tiny hammer of Thor around your neck. You might have whispered to Freya when your child was sick. You might have lit a candle and watched its flame dance, wondering if Odin was watching. Faith was not rigid. It flowed like water, adapting, reflecting, holding space for new tales and old truths. Some believed deeply, others more loosely, but everyone felt the presence of something greater. Even now, as you lie in the comfort of your own world, with soft pillows and electric warmth, you might feel that echo, that ancient breath just behind your shoulder, asking, could you have lived like this? Could you have trusted the seasons to feed you? Could you have faced the long dark without losing yourself to fear? Could you have found joy in a bowl of stew, pride in a well-spun thread, wonder in a story told by firelight? These people did, and though the world has changed, their rhythm still hums beneath the surface. In our customs, our cravings, our questions about how to live, simply, meaningfully. Honestly, asterisk, in the longhouses, women moved with steady purpose. Their hands spun wool into thread, their voices hummed old songs, their feet carried tiny feet through early morning light. You might have been one of them, tending to children, baking rye bread, weaving cloth with fingers worn but skilled. Women were the keepers of the home, yes, but also fierce protectors of family and tradition. Some could own property, run farms, negotiate trades. Their words carried weight in the community. A wise woman might be a healer, using herbs gathered from forest and field to ease pain or fight illness. Think now of the quiet strength it would take to manage the hearth while your husband was away on a raid, to raise children in a time when dangers lurked at every edge, to balance hope and hardship in every breath. Hospitality was sacred. A traveler at your door was not just a guest, but a blessing. Food shared, a bed offered, a story exchanged. The bonds made across long distances by firelight and kindness. And yet, for all the warmth, there were those who lived apart, the outcasts, the thralls who had no voice, no land, no kin. You might have crossed paths with one on a market day, a silent figure with eyes wary and hands calloused. Their lives were hard, owned by others, forced to labor in fields or homes. Some came as prisoners, others born into bondage. Their suffering was hidden behind the walls, but it was never far away. Still, even among outcasts, moments of grace emerged. A shared loaf, a kind word, a fleeting smile. Compassion threaded its way through the hardest of lives. You are left to wonder, in a world so raw and untamed, where survival was a daily battle, where could mercy find its place? The answer lies in the hearts of those who refused to give up on each other, neighbors who helped rebuild after storms, families who gathered to celebrate small victories, children who played, laughed, and dreamed despite the weight of the world. As you listen now, soft and slow, wrapped in the calm of your own space, you might feel a quiet kinship dot between then and now, between fire and flame, between the stories told and the lives lived. Could you have been a part of this world? Could you have found peace among its trials? Could you have loved fiercely enough to light 1,000 hearths? The Viking Age was not just about raids and battles. It was about people like you, like me, like the echoes of history, whispering through the ages. Now, as the warmth of the mead hall settles into quiet, let your thoughts drift toward the ties that shaped the Viking world, the families and kings who ruled with strength and honor. Picture yourself in a longhouse where the fire flickers gently, casting soft shadows on carved wooden beams. Around you, voices speak in low tones, sharing stories of ancestors, loyalty, and legacy. In Viking society, family was the center of life. Blood ties created bonds stronger than steel, connecting people across villages, fjords, and distant lands. Kings were chosen not by birth alone, but by strength, wisdom, and the respect they earned. Their rule was a responsibility as much as it was a privilege. Imagine a king, draped in a cloak of fine wool, seated on a carved wooden throne. Around him stand his loyal warriors, advisors, and family. Yet even he depended on the strength of his kin, sons to carry on his name, daughters to forge new alliances, and relatives to stand beside him in times of peace and war. Family disputes could burn fiercely, long-lasting feuds sometimes shaped entire regions. But along with rivalry came deep loyalty and love. The household was a place of warmth and tradition. Stories of ancestors passed from generation to generation, teaching values like courage, loyalty, and generosity. Think of the delicate balance these leaders maintained between ambition and duty, strength and compassion. Could you have carried such weight? Could you have ruled wisely in a world where loyalty was tested by both fire and sword? As you listen, you will explore the complex tapestry of Viking royalty and family. You will sense the heartbeat of a society both fierce and tender. Asterisk in the Viking world, family was more than just a group of relatives. It was a web of alliances, promises, and obligations that stretched far beyond the walls of any single home. Every name carried history and meaning. Honor was inherited and protected fiercely. You might imagine a young Viking boy growing up in this world. From an early age, he learned the stories of his ancestors, tales of brave warriors, clever leaders, and wise women who held the family strong. His place in the family was both a gift and a duty. Girls, too, played important roles. Though their paths differed from the warriors who fought on the battlefield, daughters were essential to the family's future. They were often married to leaders from other clans, building alliances that could bring peace or power. The idea of family also included extended kin, cousins, uncles, and distant relatives. These bonds could mean the difference between survival and isolation. Vikings lived in small communities where everyone knew each other and trust was vital. Disputes could flare quickly, but families worked hard to maintain peace within their group and with neighbors. Kings were chosen because they could unite these families and lead with strength and fairness. But their power was not absolute. They had to listen to the advice of elders and warriors, balancing their own ambitions with the needs of their people. Imagine sitting beside a Viking chieftain as he listens to his counsel by the fire. Each voice carries weight. Each decision shapes the fate of many. Royalty was not just about ruling, but about protecting and guiding. A good leader was seen as a father to his people, offering justice and support. Family feuds were part of this. World 2, sometimes anger and betrayal tore through clans, causing long-lasting conflicts. These feuds could be dangerous, forcing people to choose sides and sometimes leading to violent clashes. Yet, for all its challenges, the family remained a place of comfort. Gathered around the hearth, sharing meals and stories, family members found warmth in one another. The Viking concept of home was deeply tied to these relationships. A longhouse wasn't just a shelter. It was a symbol of unity and strength. In this chapter, you will hear more about the royal lineages, the famous kings and queens whose names echo through history. You will meet the families who shaped the Viking world, learning about their joys, sorrows, and dreams. As you listen, ask yourself, how would you carry the weight of family honor? Could you navigate the delicate balance of loyalty and power? Could you find peace in a world often ruled by the sword? Take a deep breath. Let the stories unfold softly around you, carrying you through the lives of Vikings who lived centuries ago, yet whose stories still speak to us today. Asterisk among the royal families. Sagas were passed down to preserve their history. Stories of battles fought, alliances forged, and the wisdom of kings and queens. These sagas served as both entertainment and lessons for younger generations. You might hear of King Harald Fair, who is said to have united much of Norway under one crown, or Queen Lagertha, a fierce shield maiden whose courage inspired many. But not all power came from royal blood. Sometimes a strong leader could rise from humble beginnings, earning respect through bravery and skill. Family bonds were tested in times of war and peace. Loyalties shifted, and sometimes family members found themselves on opposite sides of conflict. Imagine the weight of such a choice, standing against your own kin in battle, driven by honor or survival. Yet despite hardships, family celebrations remained moments of joy and unity. Weddings, feasts, and seasonal festivals brought people together to share food, music, and stories. Food itself was an important part of these gatherings. Simple but hearty meals of salted fish, barley bread, and fresh vegetables nourished the body. Meat was reserved for special occasions. Children grew up learning not only to fight but to contribute to the household, helping with chores, crafting tools, or tending animals. Elders held a revered place in the family. Their wisdom guided decisions, and their stories kept traditions alive. You can imagine the quiet moments by the fire, when a grandparent's voice would soften as they recounted tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors. These stories were more than myths. They were the foundation of Viking identity, weaving together past and present in the warmth of the family hearth. You could feel the strength of these connections, a reminder that no matter the storms outside, there was refuge here. So, as you listen, consider the power of family, how it shaped the Viking world, and perhaps how it shapes your own. Could you have been a keeper of these stories, a guardian of your family's honor? Could you have stood firm when the winds of change blew cold and fierce? Let these questions settle gently as you rest, carried by the steady heartbeat of history. Asterisk, the Viking world valued more than just strength and honor. It valued the bonds that held people together, bonds of kinship, friendship, and loyalty. These bonds created a network of support, protection, and belonging. The role of women in Viking families was often underestimated. Yet, women held great influence in the home, and community. They managed households, cared for children, and even took charge when men were away at sea or war. Some women became wise counselors or skilled traders, respected for their intelligence and resourcefulness. Imagine the quiet strength it took to run a household while the world outside was uncertain and often dangerous. In times of conflict, women could be fierce defenders of their homes and families. They held the family's future in their hands. This balance of strength and care, power and compassion, shaped the Viking family in profound ways. The family system extended beyond bloodlines. Loyalty to one's clan or household was as vital as loyalty to one's own parents or siblings. These ties formed the foundation of Viking society, a complex web where every relationship mattered. Kings relied on these relationships to maintain peace and order. They rewarded loyalty with land, wealth, and protection, yet they also had to be just, ensuring that disputes did not spiral into destructive feuds. The Viking legal system, called the Thing, was a gathering where free men debated and decided matters of law and justice. Imagine standing among a crowd at the Thing, listening as disputes were aired and resolved. This was democracy in its earliest form, rough, loud, and sometimes chaotic, but essential to the community. Family honor was often defended here. A man's reputation depended on how well he navigated these gatherings. In the end, the Viking family and royalty system was a delicate balance of power, loyalty, and justice. It was a world where every choice mattered, where the past and future were linked by the stories told around the fire. As you drift toward sleep, feel the steady rhythm of this ancient world, its challenges, its hopes, and its enduring bonds. Could you have lived with this weight on your shoulders? Could you have found peace in the midst of it? Let these thoughts settle softly as the night deepens. As you settle in, imagine yourself stepping into a world where every person belongs to a family, a clan, a tightly woven web of relationships that shapes identity and destiny. The Vikings organized their society into three main classes, each with its own roles, rights, and responsibilities: the Jarls, the Carls, and the Thralls. Jarls were the nobles, the chieftains, landowners, and warriors who commanded respect and led their communities. They lived in large halls and wielded power through leadership, wealth, and skill in battle. Carls were the free farmers, traders, and craftsmen. They formed the backbone of Viking society, hard-working and independent, tending fields, raising livestock, and crafting goods. You might imagine yourself as one of these Carls, the steady hands that kept the world turning. Thralls were the enslaved people, often captives from raids or born into servitude. Their lives were harsh and limited in freedom, yet even among thralls, bonds were formed and stories told. They worked the fields, served their masters, and sometimes earned their freedom through loyalty or skill. Marriage in Viking culture was more than a union of two people. It was a joining of families, a pact of alliance, honor, and shared future. Imagine the simple ceremonies by the hearth, the vows whispered beneath flickering torchlight, the exchange of gifts symbolizing trust. Gender roles were distinct but complementary. Women managed homes and families, but also influenced trade and politics behind the scenes. Men often went to sea or war, carrying the family's honor into battle. Honor, a word that echoes through Viking sagas, was a currency more valuable than gold. A family's reputation depended on courage, loyalty, and justice. To lose honor was to lose standing, to be shunned or challenged. Blood feuds were a grim reality. When wrongs went unpunished, families took justice into their own hands. These feuds could span generations, cycles of revenge and loss that weighed heavily on kinship ties. Yet, the Vikings had systems to manage conflict. The Thing, a local assembly, was a place where disputes were aired and settled. Here, wise men and free people debated, judged, and maintained order. Loyalty to kin was deep and fierce. To betray family was the greatest dishonor. The bond of clan was a shield against the harshness of the world. But it also demanded sacrifice. Imagine yourself in this world, feeling the warmth of a fire in your family's hall, hearing the stories told by elders, sensing the weight of your ancestors. Eyes upon you. What role would you take? Would you protect your kin at all costs? Could you live with the responsibilities and burdens of family honor? The Viking family was more than blood. It was a living, breathing network of love, duty, and sometimes pain. It shaped every moment of their lives, a constant presence like the northern stars above Dot. As you drift deeper into rest, let these ancient bonds surround you like a gentle cloak, a reminder of the power and fragility of family, a story as old as time, beyond just immediate family. Vikings placed great importance on the larger clan, or JT. This extended family group could include cousins, uncles, and distant relatives, all bound by shared ancestry and mutual obligations. The clan was a source of strength and security, providing protection in times of danger and support during hardship. Within the clan, respect was earned not only by birth, but by deeds through courage in battle, fairness in judgment, and generosity in times of plenty. Imagine yourself as a young Viking, listening to the tales of your ancestors around the fire, feeling the weight of history resting on your shoulders. Each name spoken aloud carried pride and expectation. Honor was not just personal, but collective. If one member of the clan was insulted or harmed, all were called to respond. This strong sense of loyalty could protect you, but also pull you into long-lasting feuds. Blood feuds often began with seemingly small offenses, a stolen cow, an insult, or a broken agreement, yet grew quickly into cycles of revenge. These feuds were deadly serious, sometimes erupting into violent clashes that could consume entire families. Yet, the Vikings did not live only in conflict. Their justice system, though strict, offered paths to peace. The Thing, the local assembly, was where free men gathered to voice grievances, make laws, and seek resolution. The Thing was a place of debate and compromise. Here, leaders and elders sought to balance justice with mercy, recognizing that peace was better for the survival of all. Women played vital roles in these family and clan dynamics. Viking women, often underestimated by outsiders, held considerable influence within the home and community. They managed estates in their husbands' absences, ran trading ventures, and sometimes acted as wise counselors. Marriage customs reflected the pragmatic and social aspects of Viking life. Marriages were arranged to strengthen alliances and secure wealth, yet love and partnership were also celebrated, sung about in poems and sagas. Divorce was possible, and women had rights to their own property, a rare status in medieval Europe. Still, family. Honor always framed relationships. A broken marriage could stain reputations. The roles of men and women complemented each other, each essential to the survival and prosperity of the clan. Men ventured on voyages, war, and trade. while women ensured the continuity of home and hearth. As you imagine your place within this family web, think about the weight of responsibility and the warmth of belonging. Could you bear the loyalty demanded by kin? Would you find comfort in the strength of your clan? The Viking social structure was a delicate balance of power, love, and duty. It shaped lives in ways both visible and unseen, guiding daily choices and forging destinies. And so, as you drift deeper into rest, let the stories of kinship and loyalty lull you, a timeless reminder that even in harsh worlds, connection is the heart's true home. Within the Viking clan, stories of ancestors were treasured. These stories connected generations, keeping memories alive and teaching lessons of bravery, wisdom, and resilience. Skalds, the poets and storytellers, held a special place in society, weaving history and myth into verses that echoed through the halls. Imagine sitting by the fire as a skald begins to sing. The flickering shadows dancing on the walls, the steady beat of a lyre or drum accompanying their voice. These stories were more than entertainment. They were the threads that held the fabric of Viking identity together. Family honor extended beyond life into the realm of memory and reputation. A name remembered well was a kind of immortality, a legacy passed down through tales and stones carved with runes. To lose honor was to risk fading into obscurity, forgotten by future generations. Blood was the strongest bond, but loyalty could also extend beyond kinship. Allies were made through friendship and marriage, expanding the clan's influence and safety. These alliances could be fragile, yet powerful, shaping politics and warfare. Daily life within a Viking family was busy and purposeful. Men rose with the dawn to tend to livestock, prepare for sea journeys, or forge weapons. Women rose early as well, managing the household, spinning wool, baking bread, and caring for children. Children learned through observation and practice. From a young age, they were taught the skills they would need to survive, whether farming, fighting, or negotiating trade. Stories of heroes and gods fueled their imagination, shaping their dreams and ambitions. The harsh northern environment demanded resilience. Long winters, scarce food, and constant threats from enemies made every day a challenge, yet family provided warmth and strength amid these hardships. Imagine the quiet moments at night, the family gathered around the hearth, sharing food and stories, the sounds of the wind and sea beyond the walls. These moments were precious, a refuge from the demands of Viking life. Yet, this closeness could also breed tension. Disputes over land, honor, or inheritance sometimes fractured families. The fear of shame or loss pressed heavily on all, a silent companion to the bonds of kinship. The clan was both a source of strength and a place of expectation. It demanded loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. To live as a Viking was to live deeply connected, bound by ties that shaped every step. Could you thrive in such a world? Would you find comfort in the strength of family, or feel trapped by its demands? The answers rest in the stories told, and the lives lived echoes from the past that still reach us today. As your eyes grow heavy, let the gentle rhythm of kinship and clan ease your mind. In this ancient world, family was everything,